Somewhere in a writer's room in Los Angeles, around 3 in the morning, Trey Parker is staring at a half-finished script. The deadline is tomorrow. The episode airs in 6 days. And somewhere across town, in a completely different building, a team of animators is putting the finishing touches on a scene where Peter Griffin turns to the camera and says something like, "This is worse than the time I tried to teach a dolphin to drive." These two moments, happening simultaneously in the same city, on the same network family of channels, for the same broad audience of adults who like cartoons, represent two entirely different philosophies about what comedy is, what it should do, and what it owes the people watching it. One show believes a joke should be a scalpel. The other believes it should be a rubber chicken. And the thing is, both of them have been on the air for over 25 years now, which means both of them, in their own way, have been right. This is Paper Town. Get comfortable. This one is going to be a long night. The story of South Park versus Family Guy is not really a story about two television shows. It is a story about two ideas, two competing visions for what an animated comedy can be in the modern landscape. And the reason it matters, the reason people still talk about it, is that neither vision has fully won. They exist side by side, pulling in different directions, each one attracting millions of viewers who are absolutely certain that their show is the better one. To understand how that happened, how two shows that debuted within 2 years of each other on different networks could end up representing opposite ends of the comedy spectrum, it helps to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the feud, the beginning of the shows themselves. South Park came first. Trey Parker and Matt Stone were film students at the University of Colorado when they made a short called The Spirit of Christmas in 1992. It was crude. It was made with construction paper and an old 8mm camera. It featured characters who looked vaguely like the boys who would become Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, and the whole thing was built around a fight between Jesus and a snowman. It was the kind of thing that film students make when they are trying to be as shocking as possible, and it worked. Not because it was polished, but because it was fearless. A Fox executive named Brian Graydon saw the short and commissioned Parker and Stone to make another version in 1995, this time as a video Christmas card he could send to friends. That second version, with more developed characters and a fight between Jesus and Santa Claus, became one of the first viral videos in the history of the internet. People copied VHS tapes, they emailed files, they passed it around offices, and Comedy Central, seeing the buzz, offered Parker and Stone a series deal. South Park premiered on August 13th, 1997, and almost immediately became the highest-rated non-sports program in basic cable history at that time. Family Guy came 2 years later. Seth MacFarlane had taken a different path entirely. He attended the Rhode Island School of Design, where he majored in animation, and his senior thesis film, a short called The Life of Larry, caught the attention of Hanna-Barbera. They hired him. He worked on shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Johnny Bravo, learning the mechanics of television animation from the inside. He was one of the few people hired by Hanna-Barbera based on writing talent rather than drawing ability. And while he was there, he made a follow-up short called Larry and Steve, about a middle-aged man and his intellectual dog. If that sounds familiar, it should. Larry became Peter Griffin. Steve became Brian Griffin. Fox picked up the show, and Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, right after Super Bowl 23, to an audience of millions who had just watched the Denver Broncos beat the Atlanta Falcons. Two shows, two origins, two creators who came at animation from completely different angles. Parker and Stone were punk rock filmmakers who had never worked in the television industry before South Park. MacFarlane was an industry insider who had learned the craft from the ground up at one of the most storied animation studios in history. Parker and Stone made their show with construction paper and later with basic computer animation that was designed to look like construction paper. MacFarlane made his show with the polished, fluid animation style of classic television cartoons. And from the very beginning, these differences in background produced differences in comedy. South Park, from its earliest episodes, was built around topical satire. The show took things that were happening in the real world, right now, this week, and turned them into stories. When something was in the news, Parker and Stone would write about it. When a cultural trend was emerging, they would mock it. And because they had an incredibly fast production schedule, they could do this with a speed that no other animated show could match. The 2011 documentary, 6 Days to Air, showed exactly how this worked. Parker and Stone and their team would begin work on an episode just 6 days before it aired. They would start with nothing on a Thursday and have a finished, broadcast-ready episode by the following Wednesday. This was unheard of in animation. Most animated shows take months, sometimes close to a year, to produce a single episode. South Park did it in less than a week, and that speed was not a limitation. It was the whole point. It meant South Park could respond to current events almost in real time. When Barack Obama won the 2008 presidential election, South Park had an episode about it airing the very next night. The episode, called About Last Night, imagined the election win as part of an elaborate heist movie plot. That kind of turnaround was impossible for any other animated show on television. Family Guy operated on a completely different timeline, and with a completely different philosophy. Its episodes took roughly 9 to 10 months to produce. There was no rush to be topical, because topicality was never the point. Family Guy was built around a different kind of comedy entirely. Its signature device was the cutaway gag. A character would say something like, "This reminds me of the time I," and the show would cut to a brief, self-contained sketch that had little or nothing to do with the story being told. Peter Griffin fighting a chicken for 3 solid minutes. A random celebrity doing something absurd. A historical figure placed in a modern situation. These cutaways were the engine that drove the show. They were bite-sized, shareable, endlessly quotable, and completely disconnected from any narrative arc. And this is where the tension between the two shows begins. Because South Park looked at Family Guy and saw something that offended it on a creative level, not the content. South Park has never been bothered by offensive content. What bothered Parker and Stone was the structure, the philosophy, the idea that comedy could be random, disconnected, interchangeable, that a joke did not need to serve a story, that a gag did not need to earn its place in an episode by connecting to a theme or a character arc. To Parker and Stone, this was not just a different approach to comedy, it was a lesser one, and they were not shy about saying so. In April 2006, South Park aired a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars. It was season 10, episodes 3 and 4, and it was one of the most direct attacks one television show has ever launched against another. The premise was this: Family Guy is about to air an episode that depicts the Prophet Muhammad, and the people of South Park are terrified of the potential backlash. Cartman sees this as his opportunity to get Family Guy canceled for good. Kyle wants to defend Family Guy's right to air whatever it wants, and the two boys race to Hollywood to determine the fate of the show. But the Muhammad plotline was the surface layer. The real target was deeper. In Cartoon Wars Part 1, Cartman articulates the case against Family Guy with surprising precision. He says that when he makes jokes, they are inherent to a story. They have emotional depth. They are based on what is relevant and have a point. Family Guy, he argues, just has one interchangeable joke after another. The jokes have nothing to do with the story. You could swap them around, rearrange them, put them in any order, and it would not matter. And the devastating thing about this critique is that Cartman, the most morally bankrupt character on television, is the one making it. Parker and Stone were saying, through their most reprehensible character, that even Cartman can see the problem with Family Guy's approach to comedy. Cartoon Wars Part 2 went even further. When Cartman arrives at the Family Guy studio in Hollywood, he discovers that the writers of the show are not human beings. They are manatees, a group of sea cows living in a large tank, pushing around idea balls that have random nouns, verbs, and pop culture references written on them. The manatees nudge 5 balls at a time into a machine, and whatever combination comes out becomes a cutaway gag. That is how Family Guy is written, according to South Park. Randomly, by animals who do not understand what they are creating. The jokes are not crafted, they are generated. It was brutal, it was specific, and it was personal. Because Parker and Stone did not stop at the show. In interviews, they made their feelings clear. Parker stated plainly that they hate Family Guy. Stone said that what made him disappointed about Family Guy was that it could be an amazing show, but that they just did not respect it in terms of writing. Parker also admitted that he hated having Cartman compared to Stewie Griffin, a comparison that viewers made frequently in the early 2000s, when both characters were at the peak of their cultural visibility. The response from the other side was more measured, but no less revealing. Seth MacFarlane, speaking at Harvard University's Class Day on June 7th, 2006, just weeks after Cartoon Wars aired, addressed the criticism in character as Stewie Griffin. He acknowledged that the cutaways and flashbacks have nothing to do with the story, that they are just there to be funny, and that this is a shallow indulgence that South Park is quite above. He said he saluted them for it, in character, which meant he could frame it as a joke while also acknowledging the truth of the criticism. It was a clever move. MacFarlane was essentially saying, yes, we know, we do it anyway. Later, in a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone, MacFarlane was more candid. He said he thought the South Park episode making fun of Family Guy was funny and accurate. But what he did not understand, he said, was the personal venom that Parker and Stone spewed in the press about the show and about him, where it was not in the context of a joke. The distinction mattered to MacFarlane. On the show, the criticism was fair game. In interviews, where Parker and Stone were speaking as themselves and not through characters, MacFarlane felt it crossed a line. And here's where the story gets complicated, because the feud was not really symmetrical. Parker and Stone were the aggressors. They were the ones who made the episodes. They were the ones who gave the interviews. They were the ones who, according to their own account, received phone calls from writers on The Simpsons saying thank you, and from people working on King of the Hill saying, you are doing God's work by ripping on Family Guy. The antipathy toward Family Guy was not unique to South Park. It existed across the animation industry. But Parker and Stone were the ones willing to say it out loud, on television, in front of millions of people. MacFarlane, for his part, largely chose not to escalate. In more recent years, he has praised South Park publicly, calling it incredible and saying that any show that lasts that long is pretty astounding. This generosity is notable because Parker and Stone have never really reciprocated. The rivalry, such as it is, has always been more about South Park's contempt for Family Guy than the other way around. But to understand why Parker and Stone felt so strongly, it helps to understand what they believe comedy is supposed to do. And the best way to understand that is to look at what South Park actually does when it is operating at its highest level. If you have not subscribed yet, now would be a good time. It is free. It takes half a second, and it helps this channel keep making these long videos for you. Consider the episode Scott Tenorman Must Die from Season 5. It is widely regarded as one of the greatest episodes of South Park and one of the greatest sitcom episodes of all time. It holds the highest user rating of any South Park episode on IMDb. And what makes it work is not a single joke. It is the slow, methodical construction of Cartman's revenge plot. The story builds. Each scene adds a layer. The comedy comes from the escalation, from the growing realization that Cartman is not just annoyed at Scott Tenorman for ripping him off. He is planning something genuinely horrific. And when the payoff comes, when the full scope of Cartman's revenge is revealed, the joke lands, not because it is random or surprising, but because it has been earned by everything that came before it. Every scene served the story. Every beat moved toward the ending. The comedy and the narrative were inseparable. Or consider Make Love Not Warcraft from Season 10, the same season as Cartoon Wars. This episode, about the boys becoming obsessed with World of Warcraft, won an Emmy Award. It works because it commits fully to its premise. The boys spend months in the game, grinding their characters to higher levels, and the joke is in the physical transformation that occurs. They become overweight. They become pale. They become caricatures of obsessive gamers. But the episode is not just laughing at gamers. It is telling a story about dedication, about the absurd lengths people will go to for something they care about, even when that something is objectively trivial. The humor is rooted in character. It grows out of who these boys are and what they are willing to do. This is what Parker and Stone mean when they talk about jokes serving the story. In South Park, at its best, you cannot separate the comedy from the narrative. Remove a joke and the story does not work. Move a scene and the whole thing falls apart. The episodes are engineered, with each piece supporting every other piece. Family Guy, by contrast, is modular, and this is not necessarily an insult. It is a description of how the show is built. The cutaway gags exist independently of the stories they interrupt. You could, in theory, take the cutaways from one episode and insert them into another, and neither episode would be fundamentally changed. The stories in Family Guy are often thin frameworks that exist primarily to connect the cutaways. Peter gets a new job. The family goes on a trip. Something happens in Quahog. These plots serve as clotheslines on which the cutaway gags are hung, and the gags themselves are the real content. Now, whether this is lazy or innovative depends entirely on what you think comedy is for. If you believe that comedy should tell stories, build characters, and use humor as a tool for exploring ideas, then Family Guy's approach looks like a shortcut, a cheat, a way of filling 22 minutes without doing the hard work of constructing a narrative. This is Parker and Stone's position, and it is the position of many television critics who have written about the show over the years. But if you believe that comedy's primary job is to make people laugh, and that the most efficient way to do that is to deliver as many jokes as possible, then Family Guy's approach is not a shortcut at all. It is optimization. It is the comedy equivalent of a shotgun versus a sniper rifle. South Park fires one carefully aimed shot per episode, hoping it hits the bullseye. Family Guy fires 100 pellets, knowing that at least some of them will land. And the numbers suggest that both approaches work. Family Guy, as of April 2026, has aired over 450 episodes across 24 seasons. South Park has aired over 330 episodes across 28 seasons. Both shows have been on the air for more than a quarter of a century. Both shows have generated billions of dollars in revenue. Both shows have shaped the way an entire generation thinks about animated comedy. The question is not which approach is better. The question is what each approach reveals about the people who made it and the audiences who love it. South Park's approach reveals a belief that comedy is a form of argument. Every episode of South Park is, on some level, making a point. Sometimes the point is political. Sometimes it is cultural. Sometimes it is philosophical. But there is always a thesis, always an idea being explored, and usually being challenged. Parker and Stone have described themselves as libertarian, or at least libertarian adjacent. Stone once said that libertarian was an apt description for him personally, and that it had probably seeped into the show, but that they never set out to make a libertarian show. What they did set out to make was a show that questioned everything: authority, convention, hypocrisy, the left, the right, religion, atheism. Every institution and every ideology gets the same treatment. Nothing is sacred, which means everything is fair game. The 2004 episode Douche and Turd, which aired the week before the presidential election, is perhaps the purest expression of this philosophy. The boys have to vote for a new school mascot, and their choices are a giant douche and a turd sandwich. Stan refuses to vote because both options are terrible, and the episode follows his journey as the entire town pressures him to participate in the democratic process. The conclusion is bleak and honest. Every election is a choice between a douche and a turd, but you still have to choose. It is cynical, but it is not nihilistic. It is the kind of comedy that makes you think even as it makes you laugh. Family Guy's approach reveals something different. It reveals a belief that comedy is a form of entertainment. Full stop. MacFarlane is not trying to change minds or challenge assumptions. He is trying to make people laugh, and he is remarkably good at it. The cutaway gags, at their best, are tiny masterpieces of comic timing and absurdity. The chicken fights, in which Peter Griffin engages in extended, elaborately choreographed battles with a giant chicken, are some of the most inventive action sequences in the history of animation. They go on for minutes at a time, destroying buildings and vehicles, and they serve no narrative purpose whatsoever. They exist purely for the spectacle, and millions of people love them. MacFarlane himself is a deeply talented person whose abilities extend far beyond Family Guy. He is a singer who has performed at Carnegie Hall and the Royal Albert Hall. He has released 6 studio albums in the style of Frank Sinatra. He has been nominated for 5 Grammy Awards. He hosted the 85th Academy Awards in 2013. He created The Orville, a science fiction series that earned genuine critical respect. He co-wrote and directed the film Ted, which grossed over $500 million worldwide. He executive produced the revival of Cosmos. The man is not lazy. He is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most prolific and versatile entertainers of his generation. And this is what makes the South Park critique complicated. When Parker and Stone call Family Guy lazy, they are not really talking about MacFarlane as a person. They are talking about the structure of the show. They are saying that the cutaway format allows the writers to avoid the hard work of integrating humor into narrative. That it is easier to write 10 disconnected jokes than to write one joke that grows organically out of a story. And they may be right about that. But the fact that Family Guy has sustained itself for over 2 decades suggests that the audience does not care about the distinction, or at least not enough to stop watching. If you are enjoying this, subscribing really does help. It is the best way to make sure this channel keeps going. There is another dimension to this rivalry that rarely gets discussed, and it has to do with what happened to Family Guy in the middle of its run, because Family Guy almost did not survive. Fox canceled the show in 2000 after its 2nd season due to low ratings. The network brought it back for a 3rd season, but the numbers did not improve, and it was canceled again in 2002. That should have been the end. Most shows that get canceled twice stay canceled. But something unusual happened. Adult Swim, the late-night programming block on Cartoon Network, began airing reruns of Family Guy on April 20th, 2003. The show immediately became the highest-rated program on the block. It dominated late-night viewing, boosting Adult Swim's viewership by 239%. At the same time, the DVD releases of the first and second seasons sold extraordinarily well. The first set sold 400,000 copies within its first month, and eventually moved 2.2 million copies, making it the best-selling television DVD of 2003 and the second highest-selling television DVD ever at that point, behind only the first season of Chappelle's Show. Fox noticed, on May 20th, 2004, the network ordered 35 new episodes. Family Guy returned with its fourth season on May 1st, 2005. It was the first time in television history that a show had been revived based on DVD sales. The resurrection of Family Guy was a genuine cultural moment. It proved that a show could build an audience outside of its original time slot, through reruns and home video, and that studios would respond to that demand. South Park, by contrast, never went away. It never needed to be revived because it was never canceled. It has aired continuously on Comedy Central since 1997. In July 2025, Parker and Stone signed a massive 5-year deal with Paramount Plus worth a reported $1.5 billion. That is $300 million per year. The deal makes South Park one of the most valuable properties in the entire streaming landscape. For context, that is more than many major sports contracts. It is a staggering amount of money for an animated show about 4 foul-mouthed children in a small Colorado town. But here's the thing. Family Guy's cancellation and revival, which could have been a humiliation, actually became part of its mythology. The show that was too good to stay dead. The show that the fans brought back. And in a way, that narrative mirrors the show's own philosophy. Family Guy does not care about prestige. It does not care about critical respect. It does not care about winning arguments. It cares about making people laugh. And the fact that enough people laugh to bring it back from cancellation twice is, from McFarlane's perspective, all the vindication he needs. South Park, meanwhile, has always cared about more than laughs. Parker and Stone have spoken openly about wanting their show to matter, to say something, to be more than just entertainment, and they have largely succeeded. South Park has entered the political lexicon in ways that few other comedies have managed. The phrase douche and turd became a shorthand for unsatisfying political choices. The character of Man Bear Pig became a symbol in the climate change debate. First as a mockery of Al Gore's warnings, and later, when Parker and Stone revisited the character in season 22, as an acknowledgement that they had been wrong. That 2-part arc, Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, was essentially an apology. Parker and Stone admitted, through the show, that Man Bear Pig was real, that the threat was serious, and that they had been too dismissive. It was a rare moment of a comedy show correcting itself, admitting a mistake, and doing so within the framework of the show itself. Family Guy has never done anything like that. It has never needed to, because it has never staked out positions in the same way. Family Guy makes jokes about politics, about religion, about social issues, but it does not have a thesis the way South Park does. It is not trying to be right about anything. It is trying to be funny about everything. And that distinction, more than anything else, is the core of the difference between the two shows. Let us talk about the Cartoon Wars episodes in more detail, because they contain layers that are easy to miss if you are not paying attention. The surface level joke is obvious. Family Guy is written by manatees who randomly select idea balls. The jokes are meaningless. The show is lazy. But beneath that joke is something more interesting. In the episodes, Kyle argues passionately that Family Guy should be allowed to air its episode depicting Muhammad, even though the content is offensive. Kyle's argument is a free speech argument. He says that if one show is censored because its content upsets a particular group, then every show is at risk. The right to offend is the right to speak freely, and that right has to apply to everyone, even shows you do not like. This is a fascinating position for South Park to take, because it means that even as the show is destroying Family Guy on a creative level, it is defending Family Guy's right to exist. Parker and Stone are saying simultaneously that Family Guy is bad comedy, and that it should be protected, that its badness is irrelevant to its right to be on the air. This is a genuinely sophisticated argument, and it is the kind of argument that only South Park could make, because only South Park is willing to hold two seemingly contradictory positions at the same time, and explore the tension between them. The Muhammad subplot in Cartoon Wars also connects to something that would become much more significant 4 years later, when South Park aired episodes 200 and 201 in 2010. Those episodes brought back every celebrity the show had ever mocked and placed Muhammad at the center of the plot. Before 201 aired, the Islamist organization Revolution Muslim posted a warning on their website that Parker and Stone risked being murdered. A member named Zachary Adam Chesser posted a picture of the assassination of Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, who had been killed by a Muslim extremist in 2004, with the caption asking whether Parker and Stone had forgotten what happened to him. Comedy Central, in response, censored the episode heavily, bleeping out all references to Muhammad and obscuring the entire 2-minute moral conclusion of the story. A Zogby International survey found that 71% of Americans disagreed with the censorship. Michael Kavanaugh of The Washington Post wrote that the terrorists had won. This was South Park at its most consequential. The show was not just making jokes about censorship, it was experiencing censorship. The comedy had become reality, and it revealed something important about the difference between South Park and Family Guy. South Park takes risks that have real consequences. Parker and Stone received death threats for their work. They had episodes banned. They had content censored against their wishes. The 5 episodes connected to the Muhammad controversy, including both parts of Cartoon Wars, Super Best Friends, and episodes 200 and 201, are not available to legally stream anywhere. They have been effectively erased from the show's official catalog. Family Guy has faced controversy too, but of a different kind. Its controversies tend to be about taste rather than principle. A joke that goes too far. A depiction that offends a particular group. These are real controversies, and they matter, but they are not the same as having your life threatened because you drew a picture. The stakes are different, and those stakes reveal something about the ambitions of each show. South Park aims for the throat. Family Guy aims for the funny bone. Both can get you in trouble, but only one can get you killed. If you have been listening for a while and you have not subscribed yet, it really does make a difference. It is completely free, and it helps more than you might think. There is a philosophical framework that helps explain the difference between these two shows, and it comes from an unlikely place. The distinction between Horatian and Juvenalian satire. Horatian satire, named after the Roman poet Horace, is gentle, amused, and tolerant. It pokes fun at human folly without malice. It laughs with its targets as much as at them. Juvenalian satire, named after the Roman poet Juvenal, is sharp, bitter, and contemptuous. It attacks vice and stupidity with the intention of provoking outrage and change. South Park is Juvenalian. It does not just observe foolishness, it eviscerates it. When South Park goes after Scientology in Trapped in the Closet, it is not chuckling at a quirky religion. It is dismantling it piece by piece, laying out the actual beliefs of Scientology on screen with a disclaimer reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe," and daring anyone to defend them. When it goes after the Catholic Church, or the entertainment industry, or political correctness, or social media, it does so with genuine anger beneath the humor. The jokes are funny, but they are also weapons. Family Guy is closer to Horatian, but it does not fit neatly into either category because it is not really doing satire at all. It is doing parody, pastiche, and reference humor. When Family Guy makes a joke about a celebrity or a historical event, it is not trying to expose hypocrisy or provoke thought. It is trying to create a funny image, a funny juxtaposition, a funny moment that exists entirely for its own sake. The humor is self-contained. It does not reach beyond itself. It does not ask you to think differently about anything. It just asks you to laugh. And there is nothing wrong with that. The history of comedy is full of performers and shows that existed purely to entertain. Vaudeville, slapstick, physical comedy, puns. These are all forms of humor that do not require a thesis or a message. They are funny because they are funny, and no further justification is needed. Family Guy belongs to this tradition. It is the animated equivalent of a variety show, and the cutaway gags are its sketches. South Park belongs to a different tradition entirely. It belongs to the tradition of Jonathan Swift and Mark Twain, of George Carlin and Lenny Bruce. It is comedy as social commentary, comedy as protest, comedy as a way of saying the things that polite society refuses to say. And the thing about this tradition is that it demands more from its creators and its audience. It demands that the comedy be about something, that it have a point, that it earn its laughs by connecting them to ideas. This is why Parker and Stone take the comparison to Family Guy so personally. When someone says that Cartman reminds them of Stewie, or that South Park's humor is similar to Family Guy's, Parker and Stone hear it as a fundamental misunderstanding of what they are trying to do. It is like comparing a surgeon to a butcher. Both use knives. Both cut things open. But the purpose is entirely different. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because the truth is that Family Guy, despite its reputation for random humor, has produced episodes that are genuinely ambitious in their storytelling. The road to episodes, which follow Brian and Stewie on various adventures, are some of the most creative and narratively cohesive episodes in the show's history. Road to the Multiverse explores parallel universes with genuine imagination and visual inventiveness. Road to the North Pole, the show's first hour-long episode, was nominated for 3 Primetime Emmy Awards and a Grammy Award. These episodes prove that the Family Guy team is capable of sustained narrative when they choose to pursue it. The episode, And Then There Were Fewer, which aired in 2010, is another example. It is an hour-long murder mystery in the style of Agatha Christie, featuring nearly every recurring character in Quahog. Characters die permanently in the episode. Diane Simmons is revealed as the killer and is shot dead. The show confirmed that the deaths were canon and that those characters would not return. This kind of commitment to consequences is unusual for Family Guy, which typically operates in a world where nothing has permanent consequences, and the status quo is always restored by the end of the episode. And Then There Were Fewer showed that McFarlane and his team could tell a sustained, consequential story when they wanted to. They just usually chose not to, and that choice is what bothers Parker and Stone the most. It is not that McFarlane is incapable of doing what they do. It is that he does not seem to want to. He has the talent, the resources, the platform, and the audience. He could make every episode a road to the multiverse, or an And Then There Were Fewer. Instead, he makes episodes where Peter falls down and hurts his knee for 30 seconds and then cuts to a random celebrity doing something unrelated. And from Parker and Stone's perspective, that is a waste. But from McFarlane's perspective, it is freedom. McFarlane has never claimed that Family Guy is high art. He has never positioned himself as a satirist or a social commentator, at least not through Family Guy. His other projects, like The Orville, show a very different sensibility. McFarlane is a genuine science fiction fan who poured his heart into creating a show that honored the spirit of Star Trek while telling original stories with real emotional depth. The Orville was his passion project, the show he wanted to make, the show that reflected his actual creative ambitions. Family Guy, by contrast, is the show that made him famous and wealthy enough to pursue those ambitions. It is the golden goose, and McFarlane has been smart enough to keep feeding it, even as he pursues other things. This is another key difference between the two camps. Parker and Stone have put everything into South Park. It is their life's work. They have made a movie, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, which grossed $83 million on a $21 million budget and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song for Blame Canada. They attended the ceremony in dresses. They have made Team America, World Police, a puppet comedy that grossed over $50 million. They have created The Book of Mormon, which won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, and earned Parker 4 Tony wins in a single night, tying a record set by Joshua Logan for South Pacific. They have won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards and a Grammy. But through all of these projects, South Park has remained the center of their creative universe. Everything else is a side project. South Park is the main event. McFarlane, by contrast, has diversified. Family Guy is one of several shows. American Dad, which he co-created, has been running since 2005. The Cleveland Show ran for 4 seasons. He has directed feature films. He has hosted the Oscars. He has recorded albums. He has starred in and produced The Orville. Family Guy is the foundation of his empire, but it is not the whole empire. And this diversification means that McFarlane does not pour himself into Family Guy the way Parker and Stone pour themselves into South Park. He does not need to. Family Guy does not need to be his best work. It just needs to be profitable and entertaining enough to keep going. The audience dynamics of the two shows also differ in revealing ways. South Park's audience tends to skew slightly older and more engaged with current events. The show rewards viewers who are paying attention to the news, who recognize the references, who understand the satire. There is a premium on knowledge and cultural literacy. If you do not know what Man Bear Pig is satirizing, the joke does not land the same way. If you do not know who Scott Tenorman is, the payoff of Scott Tenorman Must Die loses some of its impact. Family Guy's audience is broader and less dependent on external knowledge. You do not need to know anything about current events to enjoy a cutaway gag about Peter fighting a chicken. You do not need to understand political satire to laugh at Stewie's plans for world domination. The humor is accessible in a way that South Park's is not. And this accessibility is not a flaw, it is a feature. It means that Family Guy can reach people who would never watch South Park. And it means that Family Guy episodes have a longer shelf life, because they are not tied to specific moments in time. A South Park episode about the 2008 election is less funny in 2026 than it was in 2008 because the context has faded. A Family Guy cutaway gag about Peter trying to play chess with a monkey is exactly as funny now as it was when it aired, because the joke does not depend on anything outside itself. This is the trade-off. South Park is timely. Family Guy is timeless. South Park is specific. Family Guy is universal. South Park ages like wine, some episodes getting better with time as the depth of the satire becomes more apparent, and some episodes aging poorly as the targets become irrelevant. Family Guy ages like plastic, neither improving nor degrading, remaining exactly what it always was. If you are still here, thank you. That really does mean something. And if you want to see more of these videos, subscribing is the best way to make that happen. Let us talk about what happened after Cartoon Wars, because the feud did not end there. It evolved, and its evolution tells us something about how both shows have changed over the past 2 decades. In the years following Cartoon Wars, South Park continued to push boundaries. The Imagination Land trilogy in season 11 won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more. Episodes 200 and 201 in season 14 triggered the death threats and censorship already discussed. The show tackled social media, political correctness, the streaming wars, school shootings, the opioid crisis, and dozens of other topics with the same fearless approach it had always taken. Parker and Stone did not slow down. If anything, they became more ambitious. The show began experimenting with serialized storytelling in seasons 18 through 20, where episodes connected to each other in ongoing arcs rather than standing alone. This was a departure from the show's traditional format and showed Parker and Stone's willingness to evolve, to take risks, to refuse to settle into a comfortable routine. Family Guy, meanwhile, underwent its own changes, though they were less dramatic. The show gradually reduced its reliance on cutaway gags in later seasons, a shift that suggested the writers recognized the limitations of the format. The show began to lean more heavily into continuity, referencing past episodes and maintaining some character development across seasons. Peter and Lois's marriage, which had been almost entirely static in the early seasons, became a source of genuine emotional stories. Brian, originally the show's voice of reason, became more cynical and self-absorbed, a change that divided fans, but gave the character more complexity. The most dramatic moment in Family Guy's later run came in 2013, when the show appeared to kill off Brian Griffin. The episode Life of Brian showed Brian being hit by a car and dying, with the Griffin family mourning his loss. The internet erupted. Fans organized petitions demanding Brian's return. The reaction was so intense that it became a cultural moment in itself, separate from the show. Brian was, of course, brought back 2 episodes later, via time travel. But the episode proved something important. People cared about these characters. For all the criticism about shallow writing and interchangeable jokes, Family Guy had created characters that millions of people were genuinely attached to. You cannot fake that kind of emotional investment. It has to be earned over time, through repeated exposure, through the accumulation of small moments that add up to something like affection. South Park has had similar moments of genuine emotional weight, but they tend to be constructed differently. The show does not usually ask you to feel for its characters in the way that a traditional sitcom does. Instead, it asks you to feel about an idea. The emotional weight of You're Getting Old, the season 15 episode in which Stan's parents divorce and Stan begins to see everything as literal excrement, comes not from attachment to Stan as a character, but from the universality of the experience. Growing up, losing the ability to enjoy things, watching the world turn sour. The episode is not about Stan. It is about you. And that is a different kind of emotional engagement. One that is more intellectual than sentimental, but no less powerful. There is also the question of influence. Both shows have shaped the landscape of animated comedy, but in different ways. South Park's influence is primarily structural and thematic. It proved that animated shows could be topical, political, and philosophically ambitious. It showed that animation did not have to be for children and did not have to avoid difficult subjects. It opened the door for shows like BoJack Horseman, which combined comedy with genuine emotional depth and existential themes. It influenced the way people think about satire, about free speech, about the role of comedy in a democratic society. Family Guy's influence is primarily formal and stylistic. It popularized the cutaway gag format, which has been adopted by numerous other shows and is now a standard device in animated comedy. It proved that a show could succeed on the strength of its jokes alone, without strong narratives or character development. It influenced the pacing and editing of comedy television, encouraging faster cuts, shorter scenes, and a more frenetic energy. It also demonstrated the power of internet virality, before that concept had a name. Family Guy clips were among the most shared videos on early YouTube, and the show's bite-sized humor was perfectly suited to the emerging culture of social media, where content is consumed in fragments rather than in complete episodes. In this sense, Family Guy was ahead of its time. The modular, disconnected, reference-heavy style that Parker and Stone criticized as lazy in 2006 turned out to be the dominant style of internet humor. Memes are cutaway gags. TikTok videos are cutaway gags. The entire structure of social media comedy, where context is irrelevant and the joke exists in isolation, is the Family Guy model. Parker and Stone were right that the cutaway format is easier to produce than integrated narrative comedy. What they did not anticipate is that the internet would make that format the default mode of comedy for an entire generation. South Park, by contrast, does not translate well to social media. Its episodes need to be watched in full to be understood. Pulling a single joke out of context strips it of the narrative scaffolding that gives it meaning. A South Park clip on YouTube is like a paragraph from a novel. You can read it and get some sense of the style, but you are missing the story. This means that South Park's cultural influence operates differently. It does not spread through clips and memes. It spreads through conversation, through people discussing the episodes the next day, through the slow accumulation of a shared cultural vocabulary. When someone says douche and turd in a political conversation, everyone who watches South Park knows exactly what they mean. But that reference only works if you have seen the episode. It is insider knowledge, shared among a community of viewers who have invested the time to watch and understand. Family Guy's references are more universal precisely because they are more shallow. You do not need to have seen the chicken fight to understand that Peter Griffin fights a chicken. The image is self-explanatory. The joke does not require context. And in a media landscape that increasingly privileges immediacy and accessibility over depth and context, that is an advantage. Let us consider the creative philosophies of the two shows through the lens of their most ambitious projects. For South Park, that project is The Book of Mormon, the Broadway musical created by Parker and Stone with Robert Lopez, premiered in 2011 and won 9 Tony Awards. It is a satire of religion, specifically the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it is also a love letter to musical theater. It mocks its subject with genuine affection, finding humor in the absurdities of faith, while also acknowledging the comfort and community that faith provides. It is both ruthless and tender, and it works because Parker and Stone care deeply about the art form they are using. They are not just making fun of Mormonism. They are making a musical that is as good as the musicals it parodies. The craftsmanship is inseparable from the comedy. For McFarlane, the equivalent project might be The Orville, the science fiction series that premiered in 2017. The Orville is, in many ways, the anti-Family Guy. It is sincere, where Family Guy is ironic. It is narrative-driven, where Family Guy is sketch-driven. It takes its characters seriously and gives them emotional arcs that unfold over multiple seasons. It deals with complex moral and philosophical questions, from gender identity to artificial intelligence to the ethics of war, with a thoughtfulness that would be unrecognizable in Family Guy. The Orville is the show that McFarlane makes when he is not being Seth MacFarlane, the comedy brand. It is the show that reveals what he actually cares about when the pressure to be funny is removed. And this is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the South Park versus Family Guy rivalry. It is not really about which show is better. It is about what each show's creator values most. Parker and Stone value the integration of comedy and meaning. McFarlane values the separation of comedy and ambition. Parker and Stone believe that every joke should serve a purpose. McFarlane believes that the purpose of a joke is to be a joke. These are not right and wrong positions. They are different philosophies, and they produce different kinds of art. If you have made it this far, a subscribe really does go a long way. It helps the channel grow, and it means more videos like this one. The Simpsons, of course, hovers over this entire conversation like a benevolent ghost. Because The Simpsons came first, it premiered on December 17th, 1989, and it is the show that proved adult animation could work on primetime American television. Without The Simpsons, there is no South Park. Without The Simpsons, there is no Family Guy. Both shows exist in its shadow, and both have acknowledged this in different ways. South Park addressed it directly in the season 6 episode, The Simpsons Already Did It, where Butters, in his evil alter ego, Professor Chaos, keeps coming up with schemes to take over the world, only to be told that The Simpsons already did each one. The episode is a meta-commentary on the impossibility of being original in a landscape that The Simpsons has already covered so thoroughly. It is self-aware, honest, and funny, and it shows Parker and Stone's respect for the show that paved the way for theirs. Family Guy's relationship with The Simpsons has been more complicated. The two shows share a network, Fox, and they have been compared to each other since Family Guy's premiere. In 2014, they collaborated on a crossover episode called The Simpsons Guy, in which the Griffin family visits Springfield. The episode was an hour long and featured an extended fight between Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson. It received mixed reviews, but it symbolized something important. The two shows were peers. Whatever their differences, they occupied the same cultural space. The crossover was an acknowledgement that Family Guy had earned its place alongside the show that inspired it. South Park has never crossed over with either show, and it almost certainly never will. Parker and Stone have no interest in that kind of corporate synergy. They are not team players. They are provocateurs, and provocateurs work best alone. There is something worth considering about the way these two shows handle their characters that reflects the deeper philosophical divide. In South Park, the characters are vehicles for ideas. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny are not really people in the way that characters on a traditional sitcom are. They are positions. Stan is the everyman. Kyle is the moral center. Cartman is the id, the embodiment of every selfish and cruel impulse that the show wants to explore. Kenny is the sacrifice, the character who dies and comes back, whose mortality is both a running joke and a quiet commentary on disposability. These characters do not grow in the traditional sense. They do not learn lessons that carry over from one episode to the next, at least not consistently. They reset. They return to their starting positions. Because the point of South Park is not the characters. It is the stories. It is the ideas. Family Guy treats its characters differently. Peter, Lois, Chris, Meg, Stewie, and Brian are not vehicles for ideas. They are types. Peter is the lovable idiot. Lois is the patient wife. Chris is the awkward teenager. Meg is the punching bag. Stewie is the evil genius baby. Brian is the pseudo-intellectual dog. These types are established in the first season and remain largely unchanged for 24 seasons. But within those types, there is room for variation. Peter can be surprisingly tender. Lois can be surprisingly dangerous. Stewie has evolved from a one-dimensional villain into a complex character with genuine emotional needs. Brian has devolved from a charming voice of reason into a pretentious bore, and the show is aware of this devolution and uses it as comedy. The difference is that Family Guy's characters exist to be funny, while South Park's characters exist to make points. Neither approach is inherently superior, but they produce very different viewing experiences. Watching Family Guy is like spending time with people you know well. Their quirks are familiar. Their reactions are predictable. The pleasure comes from seeing familiar characters placed in new situations. Watching South Park is like reading a newspaper editorial written by someone who is very angry and very clever. The characters are the medium, not the message. The message is whatever is happening in the world this week. Let us talk about legacy. Because both of these shows, at this point in their histories, are institutions. They are not just television programs. They are cultural landmarks, as embedded in the American consciousness as any show that has ever aired. And their legacies, like everything else about them, are different. South Park's legacy is one of fearlessness. When people talk about South Park, they talk about the episodes that went too far, the subjects that no other show would touch, the moments where Parker and Stone said what everyone was thinking, but no one was willing to say. The show has been banned in several countries. It has been censored by its own network. Its creators have received death threats. And through all of it, Parker and Stone have not flinched. They have not apologized, with the notable exception of the Man-Bear-Pig revision. And even that was done on their own terms, within the show, as a story rather than a press release. South Park's legacy is that comedy can be dangerous, that it should be dangerous, and that the comedian's job is to tell the truth, no matter who it offends. Family Guy's legacy is one of resilience. The show was canceled twice and came back. It was dismissed by critics and embraced by audiences. It was called lazy, derivative, and shallow, and it outlasted many of the shows that were praised for being ambitious, original, and deep. Family Guy's legacy is that entertainment does not need to justify itself, that making people laugh is enough, that a show does not need to be important to be beloved. In 2009, Family Guy became the first animated show to be nominated for the Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series since The Flintstones in 1961. It did not win, but the nomination itself was a statement. The Television Academy was acknowledging that Family Guy, for all its perceived flaws, was one of the best comedies on television. And maybe it was, because the definition of best depends entirely on what you think comedy is for. Both shows have also left their mark on the animation industry in practical ways. South Park's rapid production schedule has been adopted in various forms by other shows that want to be topical. Its use of simple animation, which was once seen as a limitation, has become a stylistic choice that allows for faster production and quicker response times. Family Guy's success on DVD and in syndication changed the economics of television, demonstrating that a show's value extends far beyond its initial broadcast. The model of building an audience through reruns and home video, which Family Guy pioneered, is now the foundation of the entire streaming industry. And then there is the question of longevity. Both shows are still on the air. South Park has its massive Paramount Plus deal. Family Guy was renewed through season 27 in a deal with Disney. These are shows that will be on the air for the foreseeable future, possibly for decades to come. And as they continue, the rivalry between them becomes less a competition and more a coexistence. They have outlasted the era in which they were competitors. They are now survivors, the last standing monuments of a golden age of animated comedy that also included King of the Hill, Futurama, and the peak seasons of The Simpsons. The golden age is over, but the shows remain, and as long as they remain, the question they represent will persist. What is comedy for? Is it a tool for understanding the world, for questioning authority, for speaking truth to power? Or is it a tool for escape, for pleasure, for the simple, irreducible joy of laughing at something stupid? South Park says the former. Family Guy says the latter. And the fact that both answers have sustained a television show for more than a quarter of a century suggests that neither answer is complete. Comedy is for all of these things, simultaneously and contradictorily. It is for making you think and for letting you stop thinking. It is for anger and for joy. It is for midnight rants about politics and for 3 a.m. when you just want to watch a man fight a chicken. If you have been here this whole time, thank you. Genuinely. That means something. There is one more thing to consider before this night is over, and it is the thing that neither Parker and Stone nor McFarlane will ever admit. They need each other, not personally, not professionally, but creatively. The rivalry between South Park and Family Guy is not just a feud. It is a conversation. It is an ongoing argument about what comedy should be, and that argument makes both shows better. South Park is sharper because Family Guy exists. The Cartoon Wars episodes are among the best South Park has ever produced, and they would not exist without Family Guy. The critique of random, disconnected humor forced Parker and Stone to articulate what they believe comedy should be, and that articulation made their own work more intentional. Every time South Park chooses to integrate a joke into its narrative, rather than let it float free, it is implicitly responding to Family Guy's example. Family Guy is the thing South Park defines itself against, and that opposition gives South Park's identity its edge. Family Guy, meanwhile, benefits from the critique even if it does not acknowledge it. The gradual reduction in cutaway gags in later seasons, the increased emphasis on continuity and character development, the ambitious episodes like And Then There Were Fewer and The Road to Series. These are not concessions to South Park specifically, but they are responses to the broader cultural conversation that South Park started. The idea that animated comedy should aspire to more than random jokes did not originate with Parker and Stone, but they articulated it more forcefully than anyone else. And Family Guy's evolution, slow and incomplete as it has been, is at least partly a response to that articulation. This is what rivalries do at their best. They push both sides to be better. Ford and Chevrolet, Apple and Microsoft, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The competition does not diminish either party. It elevates both. And the South Park versus Family Guy rivalry, for all its personal animosity and creative contempt, has done exactly that. It has given us two shows that, together, represent the full spectrum of what animated comedy can be. From the most ambitious, topical, politically engaged satire to the most relaxed, accessible, joke delivery mechanism on television. From construction paper to polished animation. From 6 days to air to 10 months of production. From a thesis about the world to a punchline about nothing. Both of these shows will end someday. Parker and Stone will get tired, or old, or both. McFarlane will move on to other things. The characters will stop speaking, and the stories will stop being told. But the conversation they started will continue. Because the question of what comedy is for is not a question that can be answered. It can only be asked again and again by each new generation of comedians and audiences who pick up where the last ones left off. And maybe that is the real lesson of the South Park versus Family Guy rivalry. Not that one approach is right and the other is wrong. Not that satire is superior to silliness, or that depth is more valuable than laughs. But that the argument itself, the constant, unresolvable tension between meaning and entertainment, between the scalpel and the rubber chicken, is what keeps comedy alive. It is the engine that drives the whole thing forward. Without it, comedy would settle into one mode and stay there, comfortable and stagnant. With it, comedy is forced to evolve, to defend itself, to prove its worth every single week. South Park proves its worth by making you think. Family Guy proves its worth by making you laugh. And both of them, in their own way, have been proving it for over 25 years now. The night is getting late. The argument is not over. It probably never will be, but that is fine. Some arguments are not meant to be won. They are meant to be had. And this one, the argument between South Park and Family Guy, between Trey Parker and Seth MacFarlane, between the scalpel and the rubber chicken, between the joke that means something and the joke that means nothing, is one of the best arguments in the history of television comedy. It has made both shows better. It has made animated comedy richer. And it has given us, the people lying in the dark listening to this, something to think about as we drift off to sleep. Or not. Maybe the chicken fight is playing behind your eyelids right now, and that is fine too. But there is another layer to this entire discussion that rarely gets explored in the usual South Park versus Family Guy debates, and it has to do with the relationship between comedy and pain. Because both of these shows, in very different ways, are built on suffering. South Park mines suffering for meaning. Family Guy mines suffering for laughs. And the distinction between those two approaches tells us more about the shows than any reresis of structure or style ever could. Think about the way South Park handles death. Kenny McCormick dies in almost every episode of the early seasons. He is crushed, burned, impaled, eaten, and destroyed in dozens of creative ways. And the other characters respond with the same line every time. "Oh my God, they killed Kenny, you bastards." It is a formula, repeated so often that it becomes a kind of ritual. But beneath the formula, there is something interesting happening. Kenny's deaths are never played for genuine emotion. They are absurd, cartoonish, and immediately forgotten. The next episode, Kenny is back, alive and well, as if nothing happened. Death, in South Park's early seasons, is meaningless. It is a punchline, and that meaninglessness is the joke. But as the show matures, death becomes more complicated. When Chef, voiced by Isaac Hayes, is killed off in the season 10 premiere, The Return of Chef, the episode is playing with something real. Hayes had left the show after South Park's criticism of Scientology in Trapped in the Closet, and Parker and Stone responded by killing his character in the most over-the-top way possible. Chef is brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club, falls off a bridge, is impaled on a tree, shot, mauled by a mountain lion and a grizzly bear, and his body catches fire. It is grotesque, but beneath the grotesquerie, there is genuine anger. Parker and Stone felt betrayed by Hayes' departure, and the death of Chef was their response. The comedy and the pain were inseparable. Family Guy handles death differently. Peter Griffin frequently sustains injuries that would kill a normal human being. He falls downstairs. He hits his knee and clutches it, wincing in pain for an extended beat that pushes past funny into uncomfortable and then circles back to funny again. These moments of pain are not connected to any larger meaning. They are physical comedy in its purest form. The comedy of a body being hurt, which is one of the oldest forms of humor in human history. Aristotle wrote about it. Commedia dell'arte was built on it. The Three Stooges made careers of it. Family Guy is continuing a tradition that predates television itself. But when Family Guy tries to handle death seriously, the results are more mixed. The temporary death of Brian Griffin in 2013 was meant to be a dramatic moment, but many viewers saw it as a ratings stunt. The show played Brian's death for genuine emotion, with a tearful farewell scene in the veterinarian's office. But the emotional weight was undercut by the knowledge that this was Family Guy, a show where nothing permanent ever happens. And indeed, Brian was resurrected just 2 episodes later. The show wanted to have it both ways. It wanted the emotional impact of a meaningful death and the safety net of a consequence-free universe. South Park would never try to have it both ways. South Park commits. When South Park makes a choice, it lives with it, even when that choice is painful, even when it costs the show viewers, or allies, or its own sense of safety. The handling of controversy is another area where the differences between the shows become stark. South Park courts controversy deliberately. Parker and Stone do not stumble into offensive territory. They march into it with flags flying. The Scientology episode, the Muhammad episodes, the depiction of the Virgin Mary bleeding in Bloody Mary, the use of the word that rhymes with maggots in the F word. Each of these controversies was calculated. Parker and Stone knew exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway, because they believe that comedy's job is to test boundaries, to push against the limits of acceptable speech, and to force audiences to confront their own discomfort. Family Guy courts controversy too, but often in a less deliberate way. The show's jokes about race, gender, disability, and sexuality have drawn criticism. But these jokes are usually part of the show's general pattern of irreverence, rather than targeted provocations. When Family Guy makes a joke about a sensitive subject, it is usually because the subject happened to come up in the process of trying to be funny about everything. The show does not single out targets for sustained critique the way South Park does. It sprays jokes in every direction and accepts that some of them will hit nerves. This difference in approach produces different kinds of controversy. South Park controversies tend to be ideological. People get angry because the show said something they disagree with. Family Guy controversies tend to be tonal. People get angry because the show said something they find tasteless. The distinction matters because ideological controversy is, in a sense, productive. It generates debate. It forces people to articulate their positions. It contributes to the public conversation. Tonal controversy, by contrast, is usually just exhausting. Someone made a joke in poor taste, people complained, and everyone moves on. Nothing is gained. Nothing is learned. The cycle repeats. South Park's willingness to generate ideological controversy is one of the things that keeps the show vital even after nearly 3 decades on the air. Every season, there are episodes that provoke genuine debate about real issues. The show has tackled immigration, gun control, transgender rights, social media addiction, the opioid crisis, election interference, and dozens of other topics. And while the show's positions on these issues are not always popular and not always right, they are always considered. Parker and Stone do their research. They think about the issues. They try to find the angle that no one else has considered, and then they express that angle through the lens of 4 children in a small Colorado town, which gives the commentary a kind of innocence that makes it easier to receive. When Stan or Kyle learn something about the world, we learn it too. Their confusion becomes our confusion. Their understanding becomes our understanding. Family Guy does not operate on this level. It does not aspire to this level. And that is fine. Not every show needs to be a vehicle for social commentary. Not every joke needs to have a deeper meaning. Sometimes a man falling downstairs is just funny. Sometimes a non sequitur about a celebrity is just entertaining. The world needs shows like Family Guy as much as it needs shows like South Park, because the world needs laughter as much as it needs insight. And there are times when laughter without insight is exactly what a person needs. If you are still listening, you know the drill by now. A quick subscribe goes a long way. There is an element of class in the South Park versus Family Guy debate that often goes unspoken. South Park is set in a small, working-class town in Colorado. Its characters are children from mostly middle-class families. The show's humor is rooted in the everyday experiences of ordinary people, filtered through the lens of satire. Stan's parents are a geologist and a homemaker. Kyle's parents are a lawyer and a housewife. Cartman lives with his single mother. Kenny's family is poor, so poor that it is a recurring joke. So poor that Kenny cannot afford the things the other boys take for granted. The poverty is played for comedy, but it is also real. It grounds the show in a world that feels, despite its absurdity, recognizable. Family Guy is set in a fictional upper-middle-class suburb in Rhode Island. Peter Griffin works at a brewery and later at a toy factory. The family lives in a large house with a 2-car garage. They take vacations. They own a talking dog who drinks martinis and writes novels. The Griffins are not rich, but they are comfortable. They do not worry about money in the way that Kenny's family does. And the show's humor reflects this comfort. It is the humor of people who do not have to worry about survival, who have the luxury of being random and silly and disconnected from the pressures of daily life. This is not a criticism of either show. It is an observation about how economic context shapes comedy. South Park's humor has an edge to it, partly because the characters exist in a world where things matter, where consequences are real, where people can get hurt. Family Guy's humor is softer, more playful, more detached, partly because the characters exist in a world where nothing really matters, where consequences are temporary, where the status quo is always restored. The economic metaphor extends to the show's approaches to storytelling. South Park is a show that believes in scarcity. Each episode has a limited number of jokes, and each joke is expected to do work. There is no waste. Every scene must advance the story, develop a character, or make a point. If a moment is not serving one of these functions, it gets cut. The 6-day production schedule enforces this discipline. There is simply not enough time to include anything extraneous. Family Guy is a show that believes in abundance. There are always more jokes. There are always more cutaways. If one does not land, another one will. The long production schedule allows for experimentation, for trying things and seeing what works. Cutaways that do not get laughs and table reads can be replaced with new ones. The show has the luxury of volume, and it uses that luxury freely. This economic logic extends to the show's relationships with their audiences. South Park demands investment. You have to pay attention. You have to know what is happening in the world. You have to understand the references. The show rewards devoted fans with layers of meaning that casual viewers miss. There are callbacks, recurring themes, and evolving character dynamics that only make sense if you have been watching for years. Family Guy demands nothing. You can watch any episode in any order and get the same experience. You do not need to know the characters' histories. You do not need to understand the references. The cutaway gags are self-contained and self-explanatory. The show is designed to be consumed casually in fragments during channel surfing or late-night scrolling. This accessibility is both its greatest strength and, according to its critics, its greatest weakness. But here is something that the critics rarely acknowledge. Family Guy's accessibility has made it one of the most globally popular animated shows in history. Its humor translates across cultures in a way that South Park's does not. A political satire about American elections does not play the same way in Germany or Japan or Brazil. A joke about a man slipping on a banana peel plays the same way everywhere. Family Guy's reliance on physical comedy, pop culture references, and universal human experiences gives it a global reach that South Park, with its specifically American targets and cultural references, cannot match. This global dimension adds another layer to the rivalry. South Park is a deeply American show. Its humor is rooted in American politics, American culture, American anxieties. It is a show that could only come from the United States, and it speaks most powerfully to audiences who live in that specific cultural context. Family Guy is also an American show, but its humor is more portable. The domestic dynamics of the Griffin family, the slapstick comedy, the absurdist cutaways, these are things that work anywhere, in any language, in any cultural context. This portability has made Family Guy a massive international franchise, with versions and adaptations airing in dozens of countries. Let us consider the voice work, because it reveals something important about the creative dynamics behind each show. In South Park, Trey Parker voices the majority of the characters. Stan, Cartman, Randy, Butters, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy, Timmy, Craig, and dozens of others are all performed by Parker. Matt Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters' father, Jimbo, and several others. The show's voice cast is remarkably small for an animated series. Parker and Stone do most of the heavy lifting themselves, which means that the show's voice is, in a very literal sense, their voice. The characters sound like Parker and Stone because they are Parker and Stone. In Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane voices Peter, Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, Tom Tucker, and numerous other characters. Like Parker with South Park, MacFarlane is the vocal engine of his show, but there is a crucial difference. MacFarlane is a trained voice actor with extraordinary range. Peter's thick Rhode Island accent, Stewie's clipped British affectation, Brian's smooth baritone, Quagmire's sleazy delivery. These are genuinely distinct voices that require real vocal skill to maintain. McFarlane's voice work is, by any measure, more technically accomplished than Parker's. He is doing something genuinely difficult, and he is doing it in every episode. Parker's voice work, by contrast, is deliberately unpolished. The characters in South Park do not sound like professional voice acting. They sound like two guys in a room doing funny voices, which is essentially what they are. And this roughness is part of the show's charm. It contributes to the sense that South Park is handmade, DIY, punk rock. The show sounds amateurish in the same way that it looks amateurish, and both qualities are intentional. They communicate a philosophy. Content matters more than presentation. Ideas matter more than polish. What you say matters more than how you sound saying it. This philosophical difference, content versus presentation, runs through every aspect of the two shows. South Park's animation is crude, but its writing is sharp. Family Guy's animation is polished, but its writing, according to critics, is less disciplined. South Park's production schedule is chaotic, but its creative vision is focused. Family Guy's production schedule is orderly, but its creative vision is scattered. South Park looks cheap, but sounds expensive. Family Guy looks expensive, but sounds, in the structural sense of the word, cheap. These are oversimplifications, of course. South Park's animation has improved dramatically over the years, and recent seasons feature visual effects that would have been impossible in the early days. Family Guy has produced episodes with writing that rivals anything South Park has done. But the general pattern holds, and it holds because it reflects genuine differences in what the two shows value. South Park values ideas. Family Guy values entertainment. South Park values commitment. Family Guy values variety. South Park values depth. Family Guy values breadth. And now, as both shows enter what may be their final chapters, even if those chapters last another decade or more, the rivalry between them has settled into something like mutual respect, or at least mutual acknowledgement. McFarlane has praised South Park publicly. Parker and Stone, while they have never retracted their criticisms, have also stopped actively attacking Family Guy. The two shows coexist in the landscape of animated comedy like two mountains in a range, each one massive, each one visible from the other, but neither one casting the other in permanent shadow. If you have made it all the way here, subscribing really does mean a lot. It is the difference between this channel growing and this channel staying the same size. There is something to be said about the way each show handles the passage of time, because it reveals yet another dimension of the philosophical divide between them. South Park, for most of its run, existed in a kind of perpetual present. The boys were always in the 4th grade. Seasons changed, holidays came and went, but the characters did not age. Time passed in the world of the show, as evidenced by references to current events, but the characters themselves remained frozen. Stan was always 10, Kyle was always 10, Cartman was always 10, Kenny was always 10, and always dying and always coming back. This changed gradually. In later seasons, the show began to acknowledge the passage of time more explicitly. Randy Marsh became a more central character, and his storylines reflected adult anxieties about career, marriage, and the search for meaning in middle age. The Tegrity Farms arc, which ran through several seasons, was essentially about a midlife crisis expressed through marijuana farming. The boys, while still in 4th grade, began dealing with issues that reflected the anxieties of modern adolescence: social media, political correctness, online culture, identity politics. The show was not aging its characters, but it was aging the world around them. Family Guy has handled time differently. Like South Park, its characters do not age in real time. Stewie is always 1 year old. Chris and Meg are always teenagers. But Family Guy has been more willing to play with the idea of time within individual episodes. Flash forwards, time travel, alternate timelines, and what-if scenarios are recurring devices. Stewie's time machine has been a plot device in dozens of episodes. The Road to the Multiverse episode explored parallel universes. These episodes allow the show to play with temporality in ways that South Park generally does not. But the most interesting temporal difference between the two shows is in how they relate to their own pasts. South Park has a complicated relationship with its history. Parker and Stone have expressed embarrassment about some early episodes and have actively revised the show's positions, as with Man Bear Pig. They see the show as a living document, one that should evolve and correct itself as their own understanding of the world changes. This willingness to self-correct is unusual for a comedy show and reflects Parker and Stone's view of South Park as something more than entertainment. They see it as an ongoing conversation with the audience. And like any good conversation, it should be able to change direction when new information arrives. Family Guy has a different relationship with its past. The show rarely looks back, rarely revises, rarely self-corrects. Old episodes exist in a kind of amber, preserved and unchanged. When the show does reference its own history, it is usually for a joke, not for reflection. This lack of self-examination is consistent with the show's broader philosophy. If comedy is about making people laugh, then there is no need to revisit old jokes and ask whether they were appropriate. A joke either landed or it did not. If it landed, it served its purpose. If it did not, the next joke will be along in a few seconds. This difference in self-awareness has implications for how each show ages. South Park, because it is willing to self-correct, has the ability to remain relevant indefinitely. The show can acknowledge its mistakes, update its positions, and speak to new generations of viewers who may have different values and concerns. The Man-Bear-Pig revision is the proof of concept. Parker and Stone showed that they could say, in effect, we got that one wrong, and the show's credibility was not diminished. If anything, it was enhanced. Audiences respect honesty, especially from a source they already trust. Family Guy, because it does not self-correct, faces a different kind of aging. Some of its older jokes, particularly those involving race, gender, and sexuality, do not play the same way they did when they first aired. The culture has shifted, and jokes that were considered edgy in 2005 may be considered cruel in 2026. Family Guy has responded to this shift by making fewer jokes of this kind, but it has not addressed the old jokes directly. They are still there, in reruns, and on streaming platforms, available for anyone to find and be offended by. And because the show never acknowledged them as problematic, there is no framework for contextualizing them. They just exist, frozen in time, waiting to be discovered by someone who does not share the sensibility of the era that produced them. This is one of the paradoxes of comedy in the streaming age. Shows that were designed for a specific moment in time are now available forever. Jokes that were meant to be heard once and forgotten are now preserved in digital amber, as accessible today as the day they aired. South Park, because it takes positions and revisits them, can navigate this landscape. Family Guy, because it takes no positions and revisits nothing, is more vulnerable to it. But there is a counter-argument, and it is worth considering. Family Guy's refusal to self-correct can also be seen as a kind of integrity. The show is what it is. It does not bend to cultural pressure. It does not apologize for its jokes. It does not pretend to be something it is not. In a media landscape where every public figure and institution is expected to constantly update their positions and apologize for past statements, Family Guy's stubbornness is almost refreshing. The show says, implicitly, that comedy should not be held to the same standards as political speech or journalism. That a joke is a joke, that it exists in a protected space where offense is expected and consequence is suspended. Whether you agree with that position depends on what you think comedy owes to its audience. And that question, again, brings us back to the central debate between the two shows. Let us spend a moment on the networks themselves, because the relationship between South Park and Comedy Central, and between Family Guy and Fox, has shaped both shows in ways that are not always obvious. South Park has been on Comedy Central since the beginning. Comedy Central is a cable network, which has historically meant fewer content restrictions and smaller audiences, but it also meant more creative freedom. Parker and Stone have been able to say and do things on Comedy Central that would be impossible on a broadcast network. The network has occasionally censored them, most notably in the Muhammad episodes, but for the most part, Comedy Central has given Parker and Stone extraordinary latitude. This latitude is not just about language or content. It is about pace, about structure, about the willingness to let an episode be experimental or confusing or deliberately unsatisfying. Comedy Central has trusted Parker and Stone's creative instincts in a way that few networks trust any of their creators. Family Guy is on Fox, a broadcast network with a much larger potential audience and much stricter content standards. Fox has had a complicated relationship with animated comedies. It is the network that launched The Simpsons, the show that proved adult animation could work on network television. But it is also the network that canceled Family Guy twice before bringing it back. Fox's content standards have required Family Guy to be more careful about language and visual content than South Park has ever needed to be. The show pushes against those standards constantly, and the tension between the show's instincts and the network's limits has produced some of Family Guy's most interesting moments. The episode PTV, in which Peter starts his own television network after the FCC cracks down on broadcast content, was a direct response to the constraints that Fox imposed on the show. MacFarlane used the restrictions as material, turning the network's censorship into comedy. It was a clever move, and it showed MacFarlane's ability to make lemonade out of the lemons that the Broadcast Standards Department handed him. The network context also explains some of the differences in the show's financial structures. South Park's $1.5 billion deal with Paramount Plus reflects the value of the show's library in the streaming era. Family Guy's renewal through season 27 reflects Fox's continued belief in the show's broadcast value. Both shows are enormously profitable, but they generate their profits in different ways. South Park's value is concentrated in its library, in the ability to watch every episode on demand. Family Guy's value is more dispersed, spread across broadcast advertising, syndication, merchandise, and international licensing. These different economic models reinforce the creative differences between the shows. South Park's library model rewards episodes that hold up over time, that remain watchable and relevant years after they air. Family Guy's broadcast model rewards episodes that perform well on the night they premiere, that attract advertisers and generate buzz. There is also the question of how each show has handled the transition from traditional television to the streaming era. South Park moved aggressively into streaming, first with a deal with HBO Max, and then with the massive Paramount Plus contract. The show also produced a series of made-for-streaming specials and movies that expanded the South Park universe in new directions. Parker and Stone embraced the streaming model because it aligned with their creative philosophy. Streaming allows viewers to watch episodes on their own schedule, to go back and revisit old episodes, to watch the show as a unified body of work, rather than as a series of disconnected weekly installments. This suits South Park's increasingly serialized storytelling and its emphasis on continuity and consequence. Family Guy has been slower to adapt to streaming, partly because its broadcast network model still generates significant revenue, and partly because the show's episodic structure does not benefit from the binge-watching model as much as more serialized shows do. You can watch any Family Guy episode in any order. There is no need to binge. There is no need to catch up on previous seasons to understand the current one. This episodic independence is a strength in the broadcast model, where viewers might tune in at any point during a season. But it is a weakness in the streaming model, where platforms use serialized storytelling to keep subscribers engaged over time. The music in both shows also reflects their differing philosophies. South Park has produced some genuinely great songs. Blame Canada from the 1999 movie was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Kyle's Mom's a Bitch is a perfectly constructed comic song that builds to an enormous payoff. The songs in the Book of Mormon are Broadway-caliber compositions that demonstrate Parker and Stone's genuine musical talent. Within the show itself, songs are used sparingly, but effectively, always in service of the story, always connected to the themes and emotions of the episode. Family Guy uses music more liberally and less structurally. Musical numbers are a frequent feature of the show, with Peter, Stewie, Brian, and other characters breaking into song at the slightest provocation. These numbers range from original compositions to parodies of existing songs, and they serve the same function as the cutaway gags. They are self-contained entertainment, moments of spectacle that exist for their own sake, rather than for the sake of the story. Some of them are genuinely impressive. MacFarlane is a talented singer with a love of classic American standards, and he brings that love to the show's musical numbers. But the songs in Family Guy are rarely as tightly integrated into the narrative as the songs in South Park. They are another flavor of the show's general philosophy of abundance. More jokes, more music, more entertainment. Fill every second with something enjoyable, and trust that the volume will compensate for the lack of structural cohesion. If you have been with this video for this long, you are one of the dedicated ones. Thank you. A subscribe really does help keep this going. There is a concept in literary criticism called the anxiety of influence. It was developed by the scholar Harold Bloom, and it describes the way that artists struggle with the legacy of those who came before them. Every poet, Bloom argued, is haunted by the poets they admire. They have to find a way to distinguish themselves, to prove that they are not merely imitating their predecessors. And this struggle, this anxiety, produces the creative energy that drives art forward. The anxiety of influence applies to South Park and Family Guy in a very specific way, because both shows exist in the shadow of The Simpsons, and both shows have had to define themselves against the show that made their existence possible. The Simpsons premiered on December 17, 1989, and it changed everything. Before The Simpsons, animated shows on American primetime television were primarily for children. After The Simpsons, they could be for anyone. The Simpsons proved that an animated family sitcom could be smart, funny, politically aware, emotionally resonant, and massively popular all at the same time. It was the template. Every animated sitcom that came after it had to reckon with it, either by following its example or by deliberately rejecting it. South Park rejected it, not the quality. Parker and Stone have always respected The Simpsons, particularly its golden age seasons, but they rejected the model. The Simpsons is a warm show. It loves its characters. It wants you to care about Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa. Even at its most satirical, The Simpsons maintains a fundamental affection for the people it depicts. South Park has no such affection. It does not want you to love its characters. It wants you to be disturbed by them, amused by them, provoked by them. The children of South Park are not the Simpson family. They are weapons. They exist to deliver the show's commentary, and any sentiment the audience develops for them is incidental rather than intentional. Family Guy followed The Simpsons more closely. The Griffin family structure mirrors the Simpson family structure almost exactly. Homer becomes Peter, the lovable idiot father. Marge becomes Lois, the patient wife. Bart becomes Chris, the awkward son. Lisa becomes Meg, though Meg is a punching bag rather than an overachiever. Maggie becomes Stewie, though Stewie is a megalomaniac rather than a silent baby. Even the settings are similar. Springfield and Quahog are both fictional American towns, populated by colorful supporting characters. The bones of the two shows are the same. The difference is in the flesh. The Simpsons uses its family structure to tell stories about the American experience with warmth and insight. Family Guy uses its family structure as a delivery vehicle for jokes. The structure is borrowed. The purpose is different. This relationship with The Simpsons is another source of tension in the South Park versus Family Guy debate. Parker and Stone see themselves as having transcended The Simpsons' influence by creating something genuinely new. A show that uses animation for political satire in a way that The Simpsons never attempted. McFarlane, by contrast, is often accused of having simply imitated The Simpsons, of having taken the template and stripped it of its substance, keeping the family dynamics and the humor, but discarding the storytelling and the heart. Whether this accusation is fair is debatable, but it is persistent, and it feeds into the broader perception that Family Guy is a derivative show, while South Park is an original one. The Simpsons themselves have weighed in on this debate, though characteristically, they have been more diplomatic than South Park. The show has made gentle jokes about both South Park and Family Guy over the years. The 2014 crossover episode, The Simpsons Guy, was, in a sense, The Simpsons extending a hand to Family Guy, acknowledging it as a peer. It was not an endorsement of Family Guy's creative philosophy, but it was an acknowledgement of its cultural significance. The Simpsons has never done a crossover with South Park, and it is difficult to imagine one occurring. The two shows occupy different creative universes, not just literally, but philosophically. A Simpsons-South Park crossover would require one show to compromise its identity to fit the other, and neither show is willing to do that. But here is something interesting about the way all three shows have aged. The Simpsons, the oldest and most established, is widely considered to have declined in quality after its first 8 to 10 seasons. The golden age of The Simpsons is generally placed between seasons 3 and 8, after which the show's original writers departed and the quality dipped. The show is still on the air, still producing new episodes, but few critics would argue that modern Simpsons episodes match the standard set by the Golden Age. The Simpsons has lasted by maintaining a brand rather than by maintaining excellence. South Park, the second oldest, has avoided this fate through its willingness to evolve. The show of 2026 is very different from the show of 1997. The humor is more sophisticated. The satire is more nuanced. The production values have improved dramatically. Parker and Stone have grown as writers and thinkers, and the show has grown with them. South Park's willingness to take risks, to experiment with serialized storytelling, to admit mistakes and correct them, has kept it vital in a way that few long-running shows manage. The show still produces episodes that generate genuine cultural conversation, as evidenced by the season 27 episodes that drew the highest ratings since 2018. Family Guy's aging curve falls somewhere between the other two. The show has not declined as dramatically as The Simpsons, partly because it was never as critically acclaimed to begin with. You cannot fall from a height you never reached, but it has not evolved as dramatically as South Park either. Family Guy in 2026 is recognizably the same show as Family Guy in 1999. The cutaway gags are less frequent. The character dynamics have shifted slightly, but the fundamental formula remains intact. This consistency is both the show's strength and its limitation. Fans know exactly what they are getting. Critics know exactly what they are going to criticize. And the show continues, steady and reliable, neither ascending to new heights nor descending to new lows. Let us also consider the fan communities that have formed around each show, because they reflect the show's philosophies in fascinating ways. South Park fans tend to be argumentative. They debate the meaning of episodes. They rearize the satire. They argue about whether the show's political positions are correct. They create detailed wikis documenting every reference and allusion. South Park fandom is, in many ways, an extension of the show itself. It is rearidical, passionate, and occasionally hostile. It takes the show seriously because the show takes itself seriously. Family Guy fans tend to be more relaxed. They quote favorite jokes. They share favorite clips. They rank favorite cutaway gags. The Family Guy fan community is less interested in rearisis and more interested in enjoyment. Fans do not typically debate the meaning of a Family Guy episode because the episodes do not usually have meanings to debate. Instead, they celebrate the show's humor, its quotability, its sheer volume of jokes. Family Guy fandom is, like the show itself, casual and accessible. These different fan cultures have produced different kinds of online content. South Park fans produce essays, video rearises, and critical commentaries. Family Guy fans produce compilations, mashups, and memes. South Park content tends to ask, what does this mean? Family Guy content tends to ask, was this not funny? Both are valid responses to comedy. Both reflect genuine engagement with the material. But they are different kinds of engagement, and they attract different kinds of people. The merchandise and commercial extensions of the two shows also reflect their different identities. South Park merchandise tends to be irreverent and provocative. T-shirts featuring Cartman saying something offensive. Posters with deliberately crude artwork. The merchandise maintains the show's punk rock aesthetic. It is designed for people who want to signal their allegiance to a particular kind of comedy, one that is edgy, confrontational, and unapologetically crude. Family Guy merchandise is more mainstream. Stewie Griffin on a coffee mug, Peter Griffin on a keychain, the Quahog logo on a hat. The merchandise is designed for mass consumption, for people who like the show but do not necessarily define themselves by it. It is the kind of merchandise you might find at a big box retailer, sandwiched between other branded products. This is not a criticism. It is a reflection of Family Guy's broader appeal and its position in the mainstream culture. Both shows have also expanded into video games, though with different degrees of success and different philosophies. South Park's video games, particularly The Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole, were developed in close collaboration with Parker and Stone and are essentially playable episodes of the show. They feature the same writing, the same humor, the same animation style, and the same commitment to topical satire. The Stick of Truth was particularly praised for its faithfulness to the source material and its willingness to push the same boundaries that the show pushes. It felt like playing South Park, not just a game based on South Park. Family Guy's video games have been more conventional. They tend to be standard mobile games or tie-in products that use the show's characters and settings, but do not capture its creative spirit in the same way. The most successful Family Guy game, Family Guy: The Quest for Stuff, is a city-building mobile game that uses the show's characters as window dressing for standard free-to-play mechanics. It is entertaining, it is profitable, but it does not feel like an essential extension of the show in the way that South Park's games do. It is merchandise in digital form. South Park's games are art in digital form. And the difference matters because it reflects the broader difference between the two shows' approaches to their own identities. There is also the matter of how each show has influenced the comedians and comedy writers who came after them. South Park's influence can be seen in shows like BoJack Horseman, which combines adult animation with genuine emotional depth and philosophical inquiry. It can be seen in shows like Rick and Morty, which uses science fiction as a vehicle for existential comedy, in much the same way that South Park uses current events as a vehicle for social commentary. It can be seen in the broader culture of internet commentary, where hot takes and rapid response rearisis echo South Park's 6-day production model. Parker and Stone did not invent topical comedy, but they proved that animated topical comedy could be done at a speed and with a ferocity that no one thought possible, and that proof opened doors for everyone who came after them. Family Guy's influence can be seen in a different set of shows. American Dad, which McFarlane co-created, takes the Family Guy format and applies it to a slightly more structured narrative framework. The Cleveland Show, which ran for 4 seasons, extended the Family Guy universe into a spin-off. Robot Chicken, which uses a sketch-based, cutaway-heavy format similar to Family Guy's, owes a debt to McFarlane's demonstration that non-narrative comedy could work in animation. And beyond television, Family Guy's influence extends to the world of internet comedy, where short-form, context-free, reference-heavy humor has become the dominant mode. The TikTok generation did not grow up watching South Park. They grew up watching Family Guy clips on YouTube, and the comedy they create reflects that lineage. If you are lying in the dark right now, half asleep, just letting these words wash over you, that is exactly what this is for. And if you have not subscribed, it is never too late. There is something worth examining about the way both shows relate to the concept of the writer's room, because the structure of who writes the show and how they write it shapes everything about the final product. South Park, in this regard, is almost unique in television. The show does not have a traditional writer's room. Trey Parker is the primary writer of virtually every episode. Other writers contribute ideas and jokes, and the room functions more as a sounding board than as a collaborative writing space. But the final script is Parker's. He writes it, he rewrites it, he stays up through the night, sometimes until the last possible moment before the episode has to be animated and aired. This creative bottleneck, which would be a liability on any other show, is South Park's defining feature. The show's consistency of voice, its coherence of vision, its ability to sustain a single argument across an entire episode, all of these qualities come from the fact that one person is controlling the entire process. South Park does not sound like a show written by committee, because it is not written by committee. It is written by one man in a room against a deadline, fueled by stress and conviction. Family Guy's writer's room operates more conventionally. The show has a large staff of writers who pitch jokes, develop stories, and collaborate on scripts. McFarlane oversees the process and contributes, but he does not write every episode himself the way Parker writes every episode of South Park. This collaborative model produces a different kind of show. The abundance of voices means that Family Guy can generate an enormous volume of jokes. Dozens of writers pitching cutaway ideas means that only the best, or at least the funniest ideas, make it into the final episode. The quantity is a function of the process. But the collaborative model also explains why Family Guy sometimes feels inconsistent. Different writers have different sensibilities. A joke that one writer finds hilarious might leave another cold. The tone can shift from scene to scene as different creative impulses compete for dominance. This is the trade-off of collaborative writing. You get more material, but you get less coherence. The production processes of the two shows are worth examining in even more detail, because they illustrate the relationship between constraints and creativity. South Park's 6-day schedule, documented in the 2011 documentary, is one of the most extreme production timelines in the history of television. The week begins on Thursday, when Parker and Stone sit down to figure out what the episode will be about. By Friday, they have a rough outline. By Saturday, they are recording dialogue. By Monday, the animation team is building scenes. By Tuesday, the episode is being assembled. By Wednesday morning, the finished episode is delivered to Comedy Central, sometimes just hours before it airs that evening. This schedule has produced some legendary stories. Parker has described episodes where the final audio mix was being done, while the opening of the episode was already airing. There have been times when the ending of an episode was not written until the day it was broadcast. This would be insanity on any other show. On South Park, it is the method. The extreme time pressure forces decisions. There is no room for second guessing, no time for endless revisions, no luxury of sitting with a joke for weeks to see if it still works. Either it works or it does not, and there is no time to find out before it airs. This produces a rawness, an immediacy, a sense of danger that no other animated show can replicate. Watching South Park, especially in its later seasons, you can sometimes feel the sweat on the page. You can sense the pressure. The show vibrates with the energy of something that was created under extreme duress, and that energy gives it a live wire quality that more polished shows lack. Family Guy's production timeline is the opposite. 9 to 10 months per episode, long development periods, multiple rounds of table reads where jokes are tested and refined, animation that goes through detailed storyboarding and review before a single frame is drawn. This process produces a very different kind of energy. Family Guy is smooth. It is polished. It does not vibrate with creative tension because the tension has been resolved long before the episode airs. Every joke has been tested. Every scene has been reviewed. The rough edges have been sanded down. This is not a criticism. Many of the greatest works of art in history were produced through long, painstaking processes. But it does explain why Family Guy feels different from South Park on a visceral level. South Park feels alive. Family Guy feels finished. Both qualities have their appeal, but they are fundamentally different kinds of appeal. The animation styles of the two shows deserve more attention than they usually receive in discussions of the rivalry. South Park's animation is deliberately crude. The characters look like they were cut from construction paper, which, in the first episode, they literally were. The backgrounds are simple. The character designs are basic. The movements are stiff and limited. All of this is intentional. Parker and Stone chose this aesthetic because it allowed for rapid production, but also because it communicated something about the show's values. South Park does not want to be beautiful. It wants to be honest. The ugliness of the animation is a statement. It says that content matters more than presentation, that a show does not need to look good to be good, that the value of art lies in what it says rather than how it looks. Family Guy's animation is the opposite. It is clean, fluid, and detailed. The character designs are expressive. The backgrounds are rich. The movements are smooth and natural, or at least as natural as animation allows. The show looks professional because it is professional. It was made by people who came from traditional animation backgrounds, who studied at art schools, who learned their craft at studios like Hanna-Barbera. The polish of Family Guy's animation is not just aesthetic, it is a credential. It says that the show is a real animated show, made by real animators, with real production values. It demands to be taken seriously as animation, even if its content does not always demand to be taken seriously as writing. This contrast in visual styles mirrors the contrast in comedic styles. South Park's crude animation matches its crude humor. The roughness of the visuals complements the roughness of the satire. Everything about the show is deliberately unpolished, from the way it looks to the way it sounds to the things it says. It is a show that refuses to be smooth, that refuses to make things easy for the viewer, that insists on being uncomfortable in every dimension. Family Guy's polished animation matches its polished delivery. The smoothness of the visuals complements the smoothness of the jokes. The cutaway gags flow seamlessly into and out of the main narrative, animated with the same care and attention as the rest of the episode. The show is designed to be easy to watch, easy to enjoy, easy to consume. It does not ask the viewer to work. It delivers its comedy directly, efficiently, with no friction. These aesthetic choices have practical implications as well. South Park's simple animation style means that the show can be produced quickly and cheaply. This is not just a matter of convenience. It is a strategic advantage. The low production cost means that Comedy Central does not need each episode to attract a massive audience to be profitable. The show can take risks that a more expensive show could not afford to take, because the financial consequences of a failed episode are relatively small. This financial freedom translates directly into creative freedom. Parker and Stone can make an episode about whatever they want, no matter how niche or controversial, because the cost of failure is low. Family Guy's polished animation means higher production costs, which means higher stakes for each episode. Fox and the show's producers need each episode to attract a significant audience to justify the investment. This financial pressure does not necessarily mean creative compromise, but it does create incentives toward accessibility and broad appeal. A joke that might alienate a portion of the audience is a risk that a higher budget show takes less willingly. The financial model encourages the show to play it safe, to stick with what works, to avoid the kind of radical experimentation that South Park embraces. This relationship between budget and risk is one of the underexplored dynamics of the South Park versus Family Guy rivalry. It is easy to attribute the differences between the shows entirely to creative philosophy, but the economics of production matter too. Parker and Stone are brave, partly because they can afford to be. McFarlane is cautious, partly because he has to be. The amount of money on the line shapes the creative decisions in ways that neither set of creators would probably acknowledge publicly. Let us also consider the way each show navigates the relationship between episodes and the broader culture. When South Park airs an episode about a current event, the episode becomes part of the conversation about that event. People discuss the episode alongside the news story. Critics write about what South Park said about the topic. Politicians sometimes respond. The show functions as a kind of animated op-ed page, offering commentary that is heard and debated across the culture. This is an extraordinary amount of influence for a cartoon, and it is a direct result of the show's topical focus and rapid production timeline. South Park is part of the news cycle in a way that no other animated show is. Family Guy exists outside the news cycle. Its episodes are not responses to current events, and they do not enter the cultural conversation in the same way that South Park episodes do. Instead, Family Guy enters the culture through its jokes. A particularly funny cutaway becomes a meme. A particularly memorable moment gets clipped and shared on social media. The show's influence is viral rather than discursive. It spreads through laughter rather than through argument. This is a less visible form of cultural influence, but it is no less real. The phrases and images that Family Guy has introduced into the cultural vocabulary are as widely recognized as any South Park catchphrase. These are not arguments, they are moments. And moments, in the age of social media, travel faster and farther than arguments. The two shows also differ in their relationship with awards and critical recognition. South Park has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards and has been nominated many more times. The show has been recognized as a significant cultural achievement by critics, academics, and industry professionals. Parker and Stone are widely regarded as two of the most important voices in contemporary American comedy. Their work outside of South Park, particularly the Book of Mormon, has earned them recognition across multiple artistic disciplines. They are, by any measure, among the most decorated and respected creators in the history of animation. Family Guy has been nominated for Emmy Awards many times, winning in categories like Outstanding Voiceover Performance and Outstanding Music and Lyrics. In 2009, it achieved the milestone of being nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series, the first animated show to receive that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961. But the show has never won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, an omission that fans have noted and discussed over the years. The show has been nominated, but has consistently lost to other animated shows, including South Park. This lack of recognition in the animated category, combined with the nomination in the comedy category, creates an odd situation. Family Guy is, according to the Television Academy, good enough to compete with the best comedies on television, but not good enough to compete with the best animated shows on television. Whether this reflects a genuine assessment of the show's quality or a bias among Emmy voters is impossible to say, but it is a data point in the ongoing conversation about what Family Guy is and what it is worth. Consider the way each show handles the concept of family. Both shows are, at their cores, about families. South Park is about the 4 boys, but it is also about their parents, Randy and Sharon Marsh, Gerald and Sheila Broflovsky, Leanne Cartman, Stuart and Carol McCormick. These parents are flawed, sometimes deeply so. Randy is impulsive, self-absorbed, and frequently ridiculous. Gerald is a troll who harasses people online. Leanne is permissive to the point of negligence. The parents in South Park are not role models. They are cautionary tales. And the show's commentary on family is that children are often wiser than their parents, that adults are just children who have learned to hide their confusion, and that the institution of family is simultaneously the most important and the most absurd thing in American life. Family Guy takes a different approach. The Griffin family is dysfunctional in a way that is played entirely for comedy. Peter is a terrible father. He ignores his children, makes fun of Meg, and regularly endangers his family through his stupidity. Lois enables Peter's behavior, while occasionally revealing depths of her own. Chris is largely ignored. Meg is actively abused, both by her family and by the show itself. Stewie's relationship with Brian is the most emotionally honest relationship in the show, and it is between a baby and a dog. The Griffins are not a family in any meaningful sense. They are a group of people who live in the same house and provide each other with setup lines for jokes. But here is the interesting thing. Despite the dysfunction, despite the cruelty, despite the complete absence of anything resembling healthy family dynamics, viewers care about the Griffins. The temporary death of Brian proved that. When a character dies on a show where nothing matters, and millions of people sign petitions to bring them back, something has happened. The audience has formed an attachment that the show itself did not intend to create. Or perhaps it did intend to create it in a way that is more subtle than it appears. Perhaps the sheer volume of time spent with the Griffin family, the hundreds of episodes, the thousands of moments, both cruel and kind, has created a bond that is stronger than any individual episode or joke. Familiarity breeds attachment. And after 24 seasons, the Griffins are as familiar as any family on television. South Park's families are less familiar because the show is less interested in them. The boys are the show's focus, and their families are supporting characters who serve the story when needed and disappear when not. Randy Marsh has become an exception, increasingly central to the show's storytelling in recent seasons. But even Randy is more of a vehicle for satire than a character whose family life is explored with any depth. South Park does not care about the Marsh family the way that a traditional family sitcom would. It cares about Randy as a symbol of American middle-class absurdity. The family is the frame. The satire is the picture. This difference in how the two shows handle family connects to a broader difference in how they handle emotion. South Park is emotionally austere. It does not often ask you to feel. When it does, as in, "You're getting old," or the episodes dealing with Stan's depression, the emotion hits hard precisely because it is so rare. The show has conditioned its audience to expect satire and cynicism. So when genuine feeling breaks through, it is shocking. The scarcity makes the emotion valuable. Family Guy is emotionally profligate. The show regularly attempts emotional beats, some of which land and some of which do not. Peter and Lois's marriage is tested and reaffirmed multiple times. Brian has romantic relationships that end badly. Stewie grapples with his identity. These emotional moments are sincere, or at least they try to be, but they are surrounded by so much irreverent comedy that they can feel incongruous. It is hard to take a show's emotional beats seriously when, 2 minutes earlier, Peter was having a 3-minute fight with a chicken. The abundance of comedy devalues the emotion, just as the scarcity of emotion in South Park makes it more precious. There is also the question of how each show handles its own mythology. South Park has built an intricate mythology over its 28 seasons. The continuity is not always consistent, but there are threads that run through the entire series. Cartman's sociopathy, Kyle's moral development, Kenny's immortality, which the show eventually explained through a connection to Cthulhu and the cult of his parents. The relationship between Stan and Wendy, the evolution of Butters from a background character to one of the show's most important figures. These threads give the show a depth that rewards long-term viewing and makes the world of South Park feel lived in, despite its deliberately crude appearance. Family Guy has mythology too, but it wears it more lightly. Stewie's evolution from a supervillain plotting world domination to a complex child struggling with his identity is one of the longest character arcs in animated television. Brian's pretensions and failures form a recurring theme. The rivalry between Peter and the giant chicken has spanned the entire run of the show. But these mythological elements are not woven into the fabric of the show the way South Park's are. They exist alongside the cutaway gags and the standalone episodes, occasional threads in a predominantly patchwork quilt. The different approaches to mythology reflect the different approaches to meaning. South Park's mythology is part of its argument. The evolution of Cartman, the recurring themes of censorship and free speech, the show's ongoing conversation with its own past. These are all elements of the larger statement that South Park is making about comedy, about America, about the human condition. Family Guy's mythology is ornamental. It adds texture to the show, but it does not carry the weight of meaning. It is there because the show has been on long enough for patterns to emerge, not because the patterns were designed to say something. And perhaps this is the final, deepest difference between the two shows. South Park is designed. Every element, from the animation to the writing, to the production schedule, to the public statements of its creators, is part of a coherent vision. Parker and Stone know exactly what they are doing and why they are doing it. The show is intentional in a way that very few long-running television programs manage to be. South Park means what it says. Family Guy is emergent. It has evolved through trial and error, through the accumulated decisions of hundreds of writers and animators over more than 2 decades. McFarlane set the template, but the show has become something larger than any one person's vision. It is a collective endeavor, shaped by the preferences of its audience, the demands of its network, and the creative instincts of its rotating staff of writers. Family Guy does not mean anything in particular. It means whatever a given episode, a given joke, a given cutaway happens to mean in the moment. And the moment passes, and the next joke arrives, and the show moves on. So where does this leave us? Where does the story of South Park versus Family Guy end? The answer, perhaps unsatisfyingly, is that it does not end. It continues. Both shows are still on the air. Both shows are still producing new episodes. Both shows are still attracting millions of viewers. And both shows are still doing what they have always done. South Park is still making angry, brilliant, topical satire that forces its audience to think about the world differently. Family Guy is still making loose, funny, accessible comedy that asks nothing of its audience except a willingness to laugh. The rivalry between them has cooled, but it has not disappeared. It has become less personal and more structural. It is no longer about Trey Parker and Seth MacFarlane. It is about two ideas, two philosophies, two visions of what comedy can be and what it should do. And those ideas will persist long after both shows have ended, because they are not really about South Park and Family Guy at all. They are about the nature of humor itself. Is a joke better when it means something, or is a joke better when it just makes you laugh? Is comedy more powerful when it changes the way you think? Or is it more powerful when it changes the way you feel, even if only for a moment? Is the scalpel better than the rubber chicken? Or is the rubber chicken better than the scalpel? There is no right answer. There has never been a right answer. And the fact that both South Park and Family Guy have been asking these questions in their own ways for over 25 years is perhaps the most remarkable thing about both of them. Two shows, two philosophies, one argument, no resolution, and millions of people lying in the dark, listening to this, falling asleep to the sound of a debate that will never end. The debate between craft and commerce, between art and entertainment, between the joke that punches up and the joke that just punches. Between Trey Parker staring at a half-finished script at 3 a.m. and Seth MacFarlane recording a Frank Sinatra standard in a state-of-the-art studio. Between construction paper and polished animation. Between 6 days and 10 months. Between a scalpel and a rubber chicken. Both of them sharp. Both of them funny. Both of them, against all odds, still here. And now, the night is quiet. The argument fades. The voices of Stan and Peter and Kyle and Stewie and Cartman and Brian drift away, back to their respective small towns and suburban cul-de-sacs, back to the parallel universes they inhabit, forever separate, forever connected by the simple, stubborn, beautiful fact that they both exist. Two answers to the same question. Two shapes of the same silence. Sleep well. The argument will be here in the morning. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.